Directed by Robert Zemeckis, the 1994 feature film Forrest Gump was about a guy who came from humble beginnings to achieve extremely unlikely success in just about every area of life. No, really, it's like his superpower. Similarly, the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company seafood restaurant chain, inspired by the movie, struck most people as a quick cash-in that also wouldn't amount to much. Only to have the chain experience a turn of fortune as unexpected as meeting John F. Kennedy after a ping pong game. So, today we're going to take a look at how Bubba Gump Shrimp worked when it absolutely should have failed. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. After that, please leave a comment and let us know what other weird chains you would like to hear about. Okay, let's see if we can remember every dish Bubba rattled off. Inspired by a story about savants on the television news magazine show 60 Minutes, author Winston Groom sat down at his typewriter and in just 6 weeks cranked out the first draft of his 1986 novel, Forrest Gump. Groom's titular protagonist, who was based on a boy his father had known in Alabama, was a simple, honest man with prodigious mathematical abilities, an impressive amount of physical strength, and a way of expressing himself that tended to make other people assume he was slow-witted. Nonetheless, he manages to lead an incredible life. The book got mixed reviews, and it didn't sell all that great. But Paramount Pictures still decided to make it into a movie. That movie would be released in 1994, and despite the fact that Groom had always imagined John Goodman playing the lead, the role instead went to Tom Hanks. Turns out, that was a good move. Forrest Gump would go on to become a massive box office hit and ultimately win 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. And in 2011, the U.S. Library of Congress deemed it culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant and preserved it in the National Film Registry. The story in the film Forrest Gump is a little different than the story in the book, but in both versions, Forrest winds up founding a seafood corporation called the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, which is named after himself and his friend Benjamin Buford Bubba Blue, who died in Vietnam. And whether or not you've read the book or seen the movie, there's a good chance the name Bubba Gump Shrimp Company will sound familiar to you, because since 1996, it's also been the name of a chain of real-life seafood restaurants. Like with most American success stories, the tale of the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company begins with a guy who wanted to make some money. That guy was entrepreneur Anthony Zolezzi, and in 1995, he was looking for a way to change the fortunes of his floundering seafood company, which was called Meridian Products. Zolezzi wanted to make Meridian a household name, but as he eventually learned, that's no easy feat in the seafood business. According to him, it's tough to make money with branded seafood products, because the profit margins are so small, there's no room for an advertising budget, so every brand essentially looks the same to customers. Luckily for Zolezzi, 1995 also happened to be the year he went to see Forrest Gump. It occurred to him that the hit film had already made a household name out of the fictional brand Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, and if he could sell his products under that name, he'd have an edge on the competition. To that end, Zolezzi contacted Paramount Pictures, the distributor of the film, and licensed the name for use on his seafood. Those wares included things like raw headless shrimp, cooked tail-on shrimp, and cooked salad shrimp. And Zolezzi was selling them under the Bubba Gump brand within 6 weeks of completing the deal. The name worked like a charm. According to Zolezzi, the level of awareness about his products shot through the roof because when you want to visit with retailers about promoting Bubba Gump Shrimp, you certainly get an audience. Business was so good Zolezzi started selling Bubba Gump merchandise, like hats and t-shirts, and it was all profitable. Eventually, a large restaurant company took note and approached Zolezzi about creating a chain of Bubba Gump restaurants. Zolezzi took the idea to Paramount, but they didn't want to do business with that particular restaurant company. Ouch! Undaunted, Zolezzi went in search of another partner and eventually reached out to Rusty Pelican Restaurants. Despite having recently emerged from bankruptcy, Rusty Pelican eventually proved acceptable to Paramount and was awarded the license. Thus, the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company became a joint venture of Rusty Pelican and Paramount's corporate partner, Viacom Consumer Products, at least until 2010, when the company was sold to the Landry's Restaurants Company. The chain has kind of had its own Forrest Gump journey through life. The first Bubba Gump Shrimp Company restaurant opened its doors in Monterey, California's Cannery Row in 1996. At the time, critics thought it was a stupid idea. But as Forrest says,
"Stupid is, stupid does, sir."
And as it turns out, the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company did just fine. In fact, it was a huge success. Once they made a success out of a second location, the owners decided the idea could get even bigger. That initial expansion was mostly in California, but eventually, there would be Bubba Gump franchises popping up all over the world. According to its own website, the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company is a casual family restaurant with a theme based on Forrest Gump's life, philosophy, and love of shrimp. That being the case, each restaurant is filled with all sorts of Forrest Gump-related decorations and exhibits. The menu is mostly shrimp dishes, but also includes other types of seafood, and many of them are named after characters from the movie. For example, there's Jenny's Catch, named for Robin Wright's Jenny Curran, the love of Forrest's life. There's also Shrimper's Net Catch with Mama Gump's Garlic Bread Basket, named for Forrest's mom. Lieutenant Dan's Surf and Turf, named for Forrest's good friend and business partner. And the chain's best-selling dish, Forrest's Seafood Feast, named for the title character himself. The restaurant also incorporates some of the film's most iconic quotes into their business model. For example, patrons can signal their servers with signs that read, "Stop, Forrest, stop," inspired by the signs held by the crowd at Forrest's college football games. And if you're the kind of person who already knew where that quote fit into the film, then you might excel at Forrest Gump Trivia, which the restaurant regularly hosts. It all sounds like what you'd expect to find at your typical movie-themed restaurant chain, except for the fact that other than the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, there really aren't a lot of other movie or TV-themed restaurant chains. There are a handful of movie-themed places with individual locations, like the Casablanca-themed restaurant that's been in Venice, California since 1980, and Pam's Coffee, a Jackie Brown-themed coffee shop adjacent to the Vista Theater in Los Angeles, which just so happens to be owned by Quentin Tarantino, but none of those are chains. The last decade or so has also seen pop-up restaurants get more popular, like the Star Wars Galactic Cantina, but those have limited lifespans, usually disappearing once whatever they're promoting has run its course. And there are plenty of pre-existing eateries that were either renamed or made famous in showbiz, like Pat and Lorraine's Coffee Shop from Reservoir Dogs, and Cheers from, Cheers. But other than the Bonanza and Ponderosa steakhouses, which are themed after the 1950s television show Bonanza, a fact that several of you just learned for the first time, the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company is something of an anomaly. Normally, the fees associated with licensing a major piece of intellectual property are generally too steep to be profitable. Just imagine how much Disney would charge you to open a Spider-Man restaurant. You would have to sling 1 million hamburgers a day, and not even old Webhead can manage that. But the name recognition generated by the film Forrest Gump and the unusual circumstances of its licensing may have just been enough to give Bubba Gump the edge on its competitors. That being said, Bubba Gump remains a relatively small chain. It currently has just 31 locations worldwide, while Red Lobster has almost 550, Captain D's Seafood Kitchen has over 500, and Long John Silver's has 385. But hey, remember what happened to all the big-time shrimp boats in the film? Before you ask, no. Tom Hanks doesn't have anything to do with the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. Neither does director Robert Zemeckis or McKelty Williamson, the actor who played Bubba in the movie. In fact, no one who actually worked on the film gets any money from Bubba Gump, except Paramount, of course. Nonetheless, in interviews, Hanks has applauded the chain's success and expressed a fondness for the way it incorporates memorabilia from the film into its decor. He has not, as far as we can tell, ever eaten at one. He does, however, like to tell an anecdote about a certain bank in New York which once refused to cash one of his unemployment checks back when he was a starving wannabe. That bank has since been converted into a Bubba Gump Shrimp Company, which Hanks counts as a victory. Anyway, there's no need to be angry that Tom doesn't get a piece of the action at Bubba Gump. He traded his salary on the movie for a percentage of the gross and made something in the neighborhood of $40 million on the deal. So Tom is doing just fine. Incidentally, Tom Hanks in the movie Forrest Gump aren't the chain's only connection to the silver screen. Actor Chris Pratt of the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, the Jurassic World franchise, and the Super Mario Bros. Movie was actually first discovered while he was waiting tables at a Bubba Gump Shrimp Company in Hawaii. The young Pratt happened to be waiting on a table occupied by actress Rae Dawn Chong, who appeared in classic 80s movies like The Color Purple and Commando, and decided to tell her he was a fan of her work. The actress, who also happens to be the daughter of Cheech and Chong's Tommy Chong, thought he was cute and asked if he did any acting. Pratt, who was living in his van at the time, had only studied acting at community college for a few weeks, but she still decided to cast him in a movie she was directing called Cursed Part 3. That particular film was ultimately never released, but Pratt credits it with teaching him how to act and kickstarting his career. Decades later, Pratt would marry Katherine Schwarzenegger, the daughter of Chong's Commando co-star Arnold Schwarzenegger. If that's not a string of coincidences straight out of Forrest Gump, your next trip to Bubba Gump's is on us. In the movie, Forrest's Shrimp Company becomes a success after he and Lieutenant Dan manage to survive a hurricane that literally sinks most of their competition, and the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company has weathered a storm or two of its own. For example, in 2013, when a former employee sued the company because of its restrictive social media policy, which prevents employees from posting about their jobs online, an administrative law judge eventually sided with the company. But the whole affair left the chain looking like it had something to hide. Forrest and Bubba would never. The company also had to close a handful of its locations around the world during the lockdown period of the COVID pandemic. And of course, there are now at least a generation or two of people who likely never saw Forrest Gump and have no idea that the restaurant has anything to do with a Tom Hanks movie, rendering them immune to much of the chain's novelty and charm. After all, the movie came out 30 years ago. Nonetheless, the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company is still afloat, with locations in 10 different U.S. states, as well as in Canada, England, China, Japan, Mexico, Bali, and Qatar. In other words, the shrimp aren't drying up anytime soon. And that's all we have to say about that. So what do you think? Have you ever dined at the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other weird history food videos.